There are some topics that never go out of fashion. Man versus woman, vegetarian versus non-vegetarian, boy versus girl, if you want, if you don't like man versus woman, etc. Right? So today we're going to look at something very similar, but more from a protein perspective. Anybody who's into, let's say, muscle building, gym, or any of that sort is always confused whether, particularly if he or she is a vegetarian or let's say vegetarian plus vegetarian, is always confused if they're going to miss out on something by not being a meat eater. So let's look. Today, I'm going to talk a bit about plant versus animal protein, a little bit of myths around that, science, and what really matters for the common man, like us, not the athlete varieties, but we'll let's see that. I think the starting hook is very simple. The question that everyone has is whether plant protein is complete, or there is a belief, strong belief, in fact, that plant protein is incomplete. And I think it is widely believed, in fact, right? And that is something that even I believed when I started working out a few years ago, that vegetarians in particular are at a slight disadvantage when it comes to, let's say, muscle building. We'll see that. So this happens to be a myth. The second issue that people have, or a doubt that people have, is can vegetarians actually build muscle or get jacked and stay healthy without meat? That's question number two. The third one is, should I necessarily be eating meat to become stronger, faster, and muscular? Right. So now, faster and stronger, it's all very correlated. So muscular doesn't necessarily mean you're fast. So it's this combination of these factors, right? So what we'll do is we'll first look at some WHO recommended list of essential amino acids. So obviously protein is broken down into amino acids which your body needs to use. That's basic science, so I'll not go deeper into that. Uh, Essentially, let's look at 9 amino acids and what really is required by the body, and whether you can get it from plant sources and whether it's complete or not. We'll also look at why in some cases plant is superior and why meat is superior in some case. So I'm going to, as usual, I have some notes. I'll share the screen for some time and then keep flipping between discussion and notes because we tend to get distracted. So yeah, so this is your screen. So we have histidine, which is required for growth, tissue repair, and myelin sheath. Isoleucine, muscle metabolism, hemoglobin production. Leucine, muscle repair, growth, protein synthesis. This is very common. Lysine, collagen formation, immune support. Methionine, detox, antioxidant. Phenylalanine, I don't know how to pronounce it, it's quite a complicated, plus tyrosine, neurotransmitters, dopamine, etc. 309, skin collagen, gut barrier, tryptophan. This I've heard this quite often. Sleep, mood, serotonin, precursor, valine, muscle, energy, tissue repair. So from a point of muscle, I think there are three, four probably important ones. Tissue repair, histidine, leucine seems to be in muscle repair. Isoleucine in muscle metabolism, etc. And then this is the ideal milligrams per gram of protein that is required. And a lot of, I mean, I had this question, right? So obviously I composed most of it using a chat with ChatGPT and a little bit of research. So I'm not going to be quite honest about it. So I was wondering what happens if we as humans miss out on, let's say, one or two amino acids, or if you're a little low, obviously that's not good for you. That's why it's called essential. If one amino acid is significantly low, it becomes a bottleneck. Protein synthesis slows or stops, even if others are abundant. So, etc., etc. A small shortfall, 10 to 20%, can often be compensated by eating more total protein. A significant shortfall, this is what we are keen on understanding. A significant shortfall in amino acids less than 50% of your requirement, especially lysine, leucine, and methionine, can impair muscle growth, tissue repair, neurotransmitter synthesis, and immune function. Right. So we'll come back to the notes a little later. So that's pretty much the primer on for people who want to know what amino acid is, what are the 9 essential amino acids, and what happens if you don't take it from the food sources that you have, right? We'll go a little deeper into the subject in a while. Now, we covered about plant versus animal, and then we looked at the basic amino acids sequence. Now, let's quickly look at how these amino acids are, let's say, available or distributed between different food sources that we commonly have. And I'll go a little bit on vegetarian sources, comparing it to egg, because I've seen a lot of vegetarians tend to eat egg, but even if you don't egg, that's fine. It's not a big deal, but we'll just look at the data so that it gives us more clarity. So these are the 9 amino acids, whatever. And then you have egg, soy, lentils, oats, rice, and wheats. Obviously, these are very commonly consumed by vegetarians. So you can see there's not even lactose included here, but we'll come to that later. Egg is considered as a complete protein source. There's no doubt about it. So in every single thing that you need is upwards of 120%, which is probably the benchmark for something to be rated as a complete protein source. And then you have soy, which is extremely close. And I wanted to take a deeper look at this. Actually, I'll just highlight it if you think it makes sense. Maybe this color, yeah. Right. You can see there's not much difference. Very similar. In some cases soy is better, in some cases egg is different. The difference is actually quite insignificant for any vegetarian to be concerned about. If you take soy, even otherwise, by having a mix of lentils, oats, rice, wheat, milk, soy, and other sources, you will be able to get all essential amino acids in slightly lesser proportion compared to meat. That's the point that people need to take. So one of the myths that people say, will go straight into the myth part and then we'll come back to the table in a little bit. Plant protein is not incomplete, it is complete. What you need to understand is this, right? They are not completely missing anything. It's just that the proportion of these amino acids in plant protein is slightly lower by about 15 to 20%, which means you need to eat a little more of the same food to be able to reach your daily requirement. Obviously, is that a disadvantage compared to meat? Yes, in terms of, you look at your mathematics of 100 grams of meat versus 100 grams of, let's say, a lentil, obviously you're going to have a slightly substandard proportion of these amino acids coming into you. We'll get into digestibility and bioavailability a little later, but essentially I want you to understand that the proportion is slightly lower, but quite insignificant. It's all about ratios, not options. You can get complete protein from plants through variety, rice, lentils, peanut butter, whole wheat, etc. I'll quickly jump into what Christopher Gardner. So if you don't know who Christopher Gardner is, he's he's head of nutrition department in I think Stanford. Yeah, Christopher, he's the guy. He does a lot of research on proteins, and that's probably the only thing he's been doing all his life. So the highlighted part which you want to answer quickly. So if somebody doesn't have time to go through the entire podcast for the next 20 minutes, you might just want to read this. This is what I'm going to talk about. In terms of meeting a protein requirement, it really doesn't matter. Protein contains all the 20 amino acids. We are looking at essential, but he says all 20 amino acids, regardless of where it comes from. It isn't the amount of protein consumed as much as the proportions of amino acids which make up protein that matters more. Meat and animal products have amino acid proportions that align perfectly with human needs. Plants aren't aligned as perfectly, but they are close, such that it doesn't really seem to matter if there's no meat in your diet. You can still get all needed proportions of amino acids from plants. That's pretty much it. Well, and he says the truth is vegetarians and vegans usually meet and exceed their protein requirements as long as they're eating a reasonable variety of food. So it's basically the variety and proportion, as I showed in the table a little while ago, that matters more than whether you are being a vegan, eggetarian, vegetarian, or a meat eater. That's what matters. So we looked at what the basic essential amino acids are, the 9 ones, and we looked at eggs versus soy, couple of other items. That's where we stopped. Let's also look at uh, yeah, so I just took a comparison between of the same amino acids between chicken breast and soybeans. Not much of a difference. And we also looked at, so I want to talk a little bit about bioavailability and the digestibility factors. So I'd say on this score, your animal protein scores better. I think so. On a scale of 100, it seems to be if it's, let's say it's 100% protein, seems to be at 85 to 90% on both bioavailability and digestibility, right? Okay, so values are generally rated 0 to 1, egg is at 1, meat, etc. is 1, soy is at 1, beef is at 0.92, pea protein 0.89, chickpeas, rice is 0.5, wheat, etc. point to face. Animal proteins are 90 to 95% digestible. Plant proteins are 70 to 90. Obviously, there's a slight disadvantage digestible due to fiber, anti-nutrients like phytic acid, lectins, etc. that block absorption. Bioavailability and digestibility. So this is something that we'll define quickly so that you understand what we are talking about. Bioavailability is how well your body absorbs and uses the nutrient. Obviously, it says animal protein is better at it by a few percentage points. On digestibility, how efficiently the protein is broken down and the amino acids are absorbed such that it is used for all your muscle building, tissue repair, neurotransmitters, etc., etc. So it says animal proteins like eggs, chicken, milk tend to have a higher digestibility, often around 90 to 99%. Plant proteins range around 70 to 90, with some exceptions like soy being higher. So obviously, you have places in which plant protein is scoring pretty well, and then you also have a lot of areas in which the animal protein is way better than plant protein, but not too significant as Christopher Gardner says. So one other question then I had is, are historically, we have evolved over, maybe about 200,000 to 300,000 years, right? And there have been vegetarians and there have been non-vegetarians, but agriculture itself is, about probably what, maybe 15 to 20,000 years old. So obviously, a lot of humans were historically and evolutionarily meat eaters, right? There's no doubt about it. So I was looking at countries like India, some research paper to see if historically there were any research and evidence to show that vegetarians or non-meat eaters in particular had significant disadvantage, or were they generally okay. So there was some study on Indian populations called Indian Migration Study, 7,000 adults, compared vegetarian and non-vegetarian factory workers across 4 Indian regions, found that vegetarians consumed adequate protein, often met their recommended dietary allowance for macros and several micronutrients. Vegetarian diets included pulses, vegetables, dairy, protein intake didn't lag behind non-vegetarians. And then we had another PACER randomized trial, North India, obese adults compared high protein lacto-vegetarian diet versus standard vegetarian diet over eight weeks. The high protein group had significantly greater reductions in weight. Obviously, this is also known that if you take more protein, it's conducive to weight loss. Protein deficiency isn't inevitable. Indian dietitian claimed 84% were protein deficient, but this was based on awareness gaps, not scientifically balanced diets. Okay, then let's go on some Western reviews and meta-analysis. So meta-analysis are, better type of research papers that are done, research work that is done. Review in Nutrition Journal 2020, vegetarian vegan adults in Western countries typically meet protein and amino acid needs through legumes, nuts, seeds, and grains. Deficiency concerns are overstated. That's from PubMed. What traditional Indian diet shows? Homes often contain rice, dal, roti, curd, paneer, some nuts, etc., ensuring complementary proteins. Reddit commentary: an Indian nutritionist note that average 75 kg adult needs only 60, that is 0.8%, 0.8 per kg per gram per kg. And traditional meals typically meets this requirement. That's pretty much, I think, done, right? So essentially what ChatGPT is also saying that, you're not going to be having too much of a lag, or you're not at a great disadvantage compared to non-vegetarians. What it means for my audience, it's going to summarize and then say milk, curd, dal, pulses, rice, rotis, nuts, seeds, and green vegetables. As you can see, pretty much it contains all the required amino acids and how it's complementary. And then, yeah, some examples of how you can beat it with milk, dal, rotis, rice, for example, nuts and curd, etc. So now we step back. We're done with the screen sharing. We go back into a little bit of discussion. And also, there's one more screen that I want to share, which I'll do. It basically says that plant protein may actually help you live longer. That's another research that was done in 2020, which I'll put that as a link in the description, right? So if I go back to my notes, so what are the main reasons people say animal protein is better? I think it's mostly due to bioavailability and the digestibility factor, and the fact that the concentration, it's kind of more optimal, right? In 100 gram, you end up getting more. For example, I think chicken breast is, I think, 20 or 25 per 100, while paneer could be 15 per 100 grams. So obviously, you eat a little, but you still get more protein. That's definitely more advantageous. So obviously, it's definitely on You have the tick mark there. What else? Basically less volume to meet protein in that much. So our context is not to decide, which one is better. I mean, the idea is to for me to assuage and tell my vegetarian friends or eggetarian friends that you're actually okay. If you see egg is like a complete superfood, so you don't have to worry if you're taking egg. If you're not taking egg, that's fine too. You'll still get almost all essential amino acids and all the 20 of them, the non-essential ones, also through a combination of these food sources that you shouldn't really be worried that you're missing out on something, right? Don't let anyone make you feel guilty. What's the other big differences between, let's say, animal and plant protein? We'll see. So, animal protein tends to be higher in saturated fat and refined carbs. It lacks dietary fiber, antioxidants, and some vitamins and minerals like vitamin C, folate, and magnesium. Skipping pulses in vegetables means missing out on critical components like iron, etc., and some phytochemicals. The advantages of plant protein: strengths rich in fiber, antioxidants, and phytonutrients, lower in saturated fat and cholesterol, some lower carbon footprint, which I don't want to get into that ecological or environmental aspects, but yeah, I think you should probably read a little bit about or watch some of the videos by Christopher Gardner, who's done phenomenal amount of research on plant proteins in particular. So I think he's probably the authority. I've referred to quite a few of his videos before this podcast, and obviously I put out a bunch of links and materials for me to refer to and also share with you on the screen. Yeah, so that's pretty much it, guys. I think just to give you an example, guys like there have been incredible Olympians and sports persons like I think who's it, Venus Williams or even Virat Kohli, who've been fantastic, vegetarians or vegans in general. They've been able to perform at the highest level that for mere mortals like us who have a typical reasonably active or less active sedentary life in general, what we eat is probably more than enough. In fact, it's a myth that's been floating around off late that people are creating a bit of a hype that India is people are deficient in protein. You're not taking enough protein, and that you should overload with protein, etc. I think it's just a mania. It's going to crash on someone. As I said before, too much of protein is anyway converted into fat. It doesn't really matter for your body weight in kg. Anywhere from zero point 0.8 to zero point 0.9 is more than sufficient, and that's pretty easy to get with whatever food you're eating, on a daily basis. So there's nothing much to worry. Of course, if you think you're lacking in something, there's always some supplements. I don't take anything. So just to give you an example of, my own example, I think the first year of workout between 2022 to 23, I don't think even I ate eggs. I was purely on vegetarian food, and I was able to gain muscle substantially or reasonably. And in the next couple of years, I restarted having eggs. I thought it was just more convenient from that perspective of getting optimal nutrients and micro and micronutrients from egg, which is the easiest source available universally. It's pretty easy to have. That's the main advantage of, maybe being an eggetarian. But otherwise, if you're a vegetarian, I don't really want you to worry that you're missing out on something. Plant protein is good enough for most part, and historically, I think even I showed you the data that you've been fine and your forefathers have been fine. So don't worry. Just make sure you have the right sources, the right portion sizes, and a variety of foods to have from, so that you have enough intake of the essential amino acids. Hope this really helps. Do share with your friends who are worried that they're not having enough protein or plant sources, or probably, if someone says it's substandard, this is good enough data for you to defend your style. If you like this content, feel free to share with your friends. That's pretty much it. I'll catch up next week with some other interesting topic. Cheers.